Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining our UQ ChangeMakers webinar series. I'm your host, Anita Heiss, author and Professor of Communications here at the University of Queensland. These are very special events with equally special guests that include you, alumni from around the globe, and of course our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Deborah Terry and her guests, as well as leading UQ academics. They're all here to talk about the trending issues that are important to you. I'm pleased to introduce today's topic of discussion, a new global economy. Are we entering a new industrial revolution? Welcome everyone to the launch event of our exciting new ChangeMakers initiative, which is connecting UQ alumni here and around the world. Tonight we are joined by UQ alumni in 78 countries around the globe. On behalf of UQ, I'd like to say in my own Wiradjuri language, Marangniria, Inyamaradu, Mianjingu, Mangu. Good evening, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners of country here in Mianjin, Brisbane, where I'm speaking to you from this evening. In tonight's inaugural event, we are hearing from 3 UQ experts and alumni on the changing global economy. Are we entering a new industrial revolution? Coined by the World Economic Forum's Professor Klaus Schwab, the fourth industrial revolution has been defined as the technological revolution that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital and biological spheres. We're seeing automation and digital disruption like never before. Things are changing and they're changing fast. The current global pandemic has arguably brought discussion of the revolution to the fore. There has been a fundamental shift in the way we live and work, especially in our interactions with technology. As businesses race to stay ahead of the technological curve, how will changes affect our jobs, our industries and the economy? Where are the opportunities and where are the pitfalls? And what role can universities play in equipping people and businesses with the skills and technologies needed to keep up? Joining us tonight to answer these questions and many more are 3 very brilliant members of our UQ community. Professor Deborah Terry, Mr. Andrew Liveris and Dr. Dean Moss. As I'm sure many of you will already know, Debbie is UQ's new Vice-Chancellor. Debbie is currently Chair of the Board of Universities Australia. She's a Fellow and past President of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia and is an appointed member of the ARC Advisory Council amongst many other roles. Debbie began her distinguished career at UQ in 1990 and we are incredibly pleased to have welcomed her back this year as Vice-Chancellor and President. Andrew is the former CEO and Chairman of the Dow Chemical Company and a former Executive Chairman of the Dow DuPont. He has over 40 years of global leadership experience, including roles in manufacturing, engineering, sales, marketing, business and general management. He helped develop the manufacturing policy for 2 US administrations and is now doing the same for the Australian government as a key member of the Manufacturing Task Force under the National COVID Coordination Commission. That commission has been created to drive economic recovery following the pandemic. Dean is CEO of UniQuest, UQ's highly successful technology transfer company, which connects leading research with industry to commercialise innovation, from the world's first anti-cervical cancer vaccine Gardasil to the superconductor technology found in most of the world's MRI machines. He's been at UniQuest for 15 years with almost 8 years as its leader. Welcome everyone and thank you for being here tonight. Andrew, I'd like to begin with you, if I may, as you led one of the world's largest companies through long periods of sustained innovation. More recently, you've been assisting the Australian government on opportunities to stimulate our economy out of the COVID-19 recession. Now, with all of your experiences in mind, how do you think the impacts of COVID-19 influence the way that CEOs lead and reshape their companies to pivot and be innovative, whilst also providing stability to a workforce who are living in a changed social, political and economic realities?
Thank you, Anita, for the question. Really pleased to be here and with the new Vice-Chancellor. Congratulations, Professor Terry, and of course, Dean, my good friend, Dean Moss. It's a big, broad, sweeping question, so I think I'll have to give you a contextual answer with respect to the dynamic that the world has seen these last 20 years. There was a concept that I had a Dow that many CEOs of my generation lived through, and the concept was called VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity was the new contextual world order. That what was happening is that the pace of change in the world, accelerated by digitalization and the internet's arrival on connectivity, meant we were all traveling at the speed of live, as to coin another term, which meant that CEOs in this contextual discussion of what to do really had to think about strategy in a very different way. It had to think about the contextual condition of volatility and uncertainty. And the way one would do that, to use a mariner example, is to have your North Star. Know where you're heading, but be prepared to handle the wild seas and the storms, and really understand the conditions of where you are as you head to your North Star. This sort of difficulty meant that large corporations, large enterprises, institutions of all sorts had to learn how to pivot, be agile, and actually how to create risk management systems. Some of the risk management systems that we created, again, straight out of the consultant handbooks, looked at impacts and likelihoods of events. The pandemic is a classic example that we're living through right now. We had it on our enterprise risk management systems. Most CEOs and boards would review it, but we had it at low likelihood, even though we had it at high impact. And so what did this mean? It meant that actually, if you look at the last 20 years, we have had 9/11, we've had the GFC, we've now got this pandemic. What is going on is this exponential increase in volatility and uncertainty has meant that what we've got to put in place is a very different set of toolboxes to handle how we respond to the circumstances around us. And of course, to do that, when you throw on top of it the geopolitical changes that are going on, Ian Bremmer from Eurasia wrote a book called The G0 World. And Klaus Schwab, who you quoted for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, just finished his recent book called The Big Reset. What this means is that we can't rely on the constancy of our environment. In fact, the collision of all these factors that are policies, social issues, environmental, the inability for us to actually predict any of this means we've got to actually create a new type of institutional immunization, if you like. So what that meant is that we really have to actually put in place top-down strategies with bottom-up reactions. Clay Christensen wrote the book, The Innovator's Dilemma. You have to be ready to cannibalize your business model in the instant. You have to move your entire business as fast as you can to cope with the condition that you face. This is the CEO dilemma today. It means that what you've got to do is actually create a human capital enterprise system that actually can live within this VUCA world that I just described, traveling at the speed of light. If you look at the Australian or country context of what I just described, what you've got is actually a discussion that actually says you can't let markets dictate the pace anymore. Actually, markets without frameworks, markets without 21st century rules that cope with this digitalization, cope with sustainability, the strain we have on the planet, how we have to respond to that with policies is top down. So as part of the work we're doing at the Commission, to answer part of your question, is we actually are looking at top-down answers. What should be a 21st century industrial strategy? What should be a 21st century energy policy? How about 21st century human capital policy, which I'm sure we're going to talk about and hear from Debbie and others on how we approach that, not just in universities, but across the spectrum of education and the workforce. So in conclusion, I'd like to say there is no now playbook. The playbook's out. The big mega trends of digitalization, sustainability, geopolitical change, the reversal of globalization means you have to learn to lead at the intersections where the traffic is constantly coming at you, and you have to have the agility to avoid the accident.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. The playbook is out. Now we know. And thank you for actually introducing the conversation this evening. There's so much there, and I know questions will be coming as we go on this evening in the chat box there. But I want to follow on now, if I may, with Dean. And Dean, I'd like to hear from you, your opinion as CEO of UniQuest about the commercialisation in the Australian context and what some of the most promising innovations are coming out of UQ right now.
Well, thanks, Anita. I think one of the most tremendous opportunities that the university's demonstrated the translation of quality research is undoubtedly the COVID-19 vaccine program from UQ. So we're in unprecedented times facing this pandemic, but what we've really demonstrated is the ability to disrupt innovation with this. So conventional vaccine development requires preclinical work, testing in animal models, establishment of safety parameters in a suitable animal model, that you can then translate into the human. And at that point, you would scale up the manufacture and do process development. And that's a very rigorous, and this is a highly regulated, because this is going to be a vaccine that goes into humans. And what the UQ team did, which is totally disruptive to the way that we've conventionally made vaccines like Gardasil from the University of Queensland, is that they took the approach of running in parallel the development of a vaccine candidate that could be tested in animals, and we could also work on the process development to scale up the manufacture of the vaccine at the same time. So we went out and raised $23.5 million to accelerate that program. Well, why was that important? Because it's taken 6 months off the development of that vaccine to get it into human clinical studies. And at a time when the world needs urgently the disruption of our whole economic perilous nature of the effect of this pandemic, that time has been absolutely critical. And so we went out and we disrupted that process by going in parallel and shaving 6 months off that. Another innovation, which similar to the vaccine space, is one of our startup companies. We've had over 100 out of the University of Queensland, is Vaxis. Vaxis is a really disruptive technology again, and this is about how you deliver vaccines. Conventional approach is to use a needle and syringe, and it's cold chain dependent. You have to refrigerate those vaccines. With Vaxis, we use a high density microarray patch with vaccine dry coated onto microprojections so that when the patch is applied to the skin, the vaccine is released into the immune system cells within the skin. So what we find is that we can disrupt the distribution and supply chain of vaccines globally. Imagine a world facing a pandemic where we could dry coat a COVID-19 vax on such a patch, and we could mail it throughout the world, not needing refrigeration, and deliver it to those most in need. So we partnered with Merck, again, the ability to partner these technologies with global distribution, marketing, regulatory companies, with the ability to get it to those in need. And it will allow us to make these devices to deliver the patch for 10 units a second, 5 million a week. That's totally disrupting the way that we manufacture a vaccine delivery technology. So there's just two of the examples out of the University of Queensland. And really, I think we can be really proud that the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Initiative, or CEPI, has chosen to partner with the University of Queensland. We're the only Australian institution that CEPI partnered to produce a pandemic vaccine, and all of our alumni community should be immensely proud of that.
Oh, absolutely. But two extraordinary examples there, Dean. The COVID-19 vaccine project in particular is a great example of government, university and private partnerships. Do you think this is a model we can expect to see more frequently as we look to accelerate other innovations in the future?
Oh, absolutely, Anita. The sweet spot for innovation that UniQuest has found as the commercialisation arm of the University of Queensland is this fusion between the ideas, the talent, access to patient capital and an available market with, very importantly and fundamentally, a paying customer. So what we found in the vaccine with the pandemic, that we've got the absolute global need and a real rush to get vaccines to market to immunise and protect the world. So we had the ideas within a quality research team, fabulous team. We've got the talent in that team to do the process development, the scale up, all of that partnered with CSL and others, really tremendous effort. But what it needed was access to patient capital to accelerate that. As I say, we've had tremendous support, over 10 million from the state government, 5 million from the federal government, and over 2,600 donors across the world to actually allow us to accelerate that program. So I think it's a tremendous coming together of a one UQ approach. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to work as a complete team, not just the science, not just the translation of that quality science, but our communications team, how we've addressed what is a media frenzy about the development of a vaccine, how we've handled it as key stakeholders, government relations, because there's tremendous pressure, as we know, on Australia and this team to develop a vaccine, how we've engaged with the community about the understanding of how we're going about developing that vaccine, how we've included them along that journey that we're making about that vaccine. So I think we will see more of the coming together of these combined teams in a one UQ approach to address these really big issues. And if we think back to Gardasil, that was 15 years in the development from when we first filed a patent through to regulatory approval. In the space of doing this vaccine, the world needs 6 to 8 billion doses. So by partnering again with CSL, as we did for Gardasil, we believe that we've got a robust technology that will scale up and will be appropriately manufactured at scale to address the global needs of the world. And really that's the great benefit of this program, because I think it's taught us all how we can work as one UQ team to deliver outstanding innovations to the world.
Well, that's just fantastic. And I'm sitting here thinking, Debbie must be very happy to be back at UQ now with all those innovations and positive, hopeful projects happening. Now, Debbie, with all this technological change, though, we've seen an obvious pivot from the federal government away from encouraging students to study critical thinking programs in the arts, humanities, philosophy. I myself have a postgraduate degree in humanities and a successful career, I might add. So how can we ensure that the future workforce across all disciplines are prepared for this change and are equipped with the social reasoning skills to manage it?
Thank you very much, Anita, and can I say how delighted I am to be here today, to be part of this panel with Andrew and Dean, and can I say a warm hello to all of our alumni who have joined us from 78 different countries. I can't wait till we have the opportunity to be back seeing each other physically, but in the meantime, I'm delighted to be back at UQ, and our alumni community is so important to us, so very pleased to be contributing tonight. So I think for those of you listening from overseas, you may not be aware, but in June this year, the Australian government announced what it calls the Job Ready Graduate Package, with the stated intent of focusing public investment in public higher education on the national priorities and, in a sense, where the economy is going into the future. Subject to the passage of legislation, the proposals, and it's a very complex set of reforms, but they do fund an extra 39,000 university places here in Australia by 2023. That's a good thing. And the package focuses very much on improving participation and attainment by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students who live in regional and remote Australia. They are very good things as well. And there are other parts of the package that do speak to some of the issues that the university sector has been raising with government. But as Anita has alluded to, while the package seeks to encourage students to study areas such as science, mathematics, engineering, teaching, etc., it does, by contrast, increase fees quite dramatically for those areas of study in the broad humanities in particular. Now, I think we would all agree, we've heard from Andrew and indeed Dean, when we look to the future, well-educated STEM graduates are absolutely critical. If we look at labour force data over the 5 years from 2014 to 2019, employment in STEM occupations grew by some 20%, and that was 2 times higher than the growth rate for any other occupations. Reflecting this trend, if we just take one example, LinkedIn has reported that statistical analysis I used to teach that area many moons ago, and data mining rank in the top 2 most in-demand skills that are requested by employers. These trends, I think, help explain the government's mindset to incentivise STEM subjects. But I think the data tells us only part of the story. If we think about digital disruption, it's challenging ideas about what it means to belong and to be marginalised, what it means to define communities into the future. We also need to humanise the digital future. It's absolutely critical. Both STEM and modern humanities scholarship are required to guide us through the ethical considerations of the impact of digital transformation, of the 4th Industrial Revolution, of big data, of artificial intelligence. We need people to think about ethics right from the very start. So we understand, and I think we'd all agree, we need our graduates, we need STEM graduates, but we also need people with specialisation in the humanities and social sciences disciplines. Those sort of people are absolutely critical to ensure that we're all ready for the future pace of change that Andrew talked about. But when we talk about the mix between STEM and humanities, we often move into a discussion about deep expertise and soft skills. So the 2 areas, and a Deloitte report, and it was focusing on preparing tomorrow's workforce for the 4th Industrial Revolution, talked about actually what this is doing is heightening even more than in the past the essential human skills: creativity, complex problem solving, relationship building, communication, emotional intelligence, and critical thinking. They are the human traits that machines cannot replace. So soft skills are obviously important, but as our chief scientist, Alan Finkel, has often argued, we have to be careful that we don't risk sort of trying to get these soft skills very superficially across all degrees. And as I think it's an example that I've heard him refer to, people, yes, they have to be ready to talk, yes, they have to be ready to collaborate, but you've got to have something distinctive to say. So we have to embed soft skills into each of our degrees. We do have to focus on those skills that are essential for our future economy, but we have a responsibility as universities to ensure that our engineers, our scientists, our mathematicians, our big data experts also graduate with a set of skills that aren't superficial, that are deep, soft skills that accompany that deep expertise to be able to ensure that they really do have an impact in not only shaping our economy, but ensuring that our social fabric stays strong throughout this period. And certainly UQ, I'm very pleased to note already that is absolutely trying to get the optimal mix between deep expertise and these soft skills, where our students are exposed to many more entrepreneurial opportunities than they would have been in the past. Work-integrated learning, and that's a way where you often learn and experience how to combine skills, has increased hugely, and I think in 2019 had some 16,000 of our students involved in deep work-integrated learning. So these are issues that are critically important for the university sector and critically important as we look at exponential pace of change into the future.
So much there, Debbie, for us to consider and plan for. But on top of all of that, we still need to talk about livelihoods. There is the suggestion that the next revolution will cause greater income inequality, with high-skilled workers rewarded with higher pay and artificial intelligence replacing many current middle-income roles. So how will universities respond to this deepening skills gap and ensure that students and graduates aren't left behind?
Yeah, no, and Anita, another very, very good question. I think, obviously, and there's been a host of reports that have talked about the demise of jobs potentially due to automation and AI. I think, you know, most of us now would absolutely agree, and most reports agree, many existing jobs will be transformed. Some will be eliminated, especially sort of routine jobs, but new kinds of jobs are going to emerge. And what we need to do, we do live in a digital world. So if you look at even what lawyers do, doctors do, architects do, accountants do, they have significantly changed the way they work. And if we just look through the recent pandemic, the current pandemic, we've seen telehealth now becoming an almost routine part of the health service. We can see automation is in absolutely all of our remote mining sites. So what we have to do, and one of our responsibilities, I think, as universities, is ensure that the potential that's going to come from the fourth industrial revolution doesn't widen the inequality gap that already exists. There's a real threat that it will widen that gap, and we absolutely have to ensure that that doesn't happen. We talk in this country about the digital divide. The digital divide is still there, and there are many communities. And now, yes, the NBN has been rolled out, and it's doing well, but there are still many communities that don't have access to the internet and the speeds that they need. We have young people who aren't receiving education in the digital skills that they will need to be successful. We will need to ensure in every one of our degrees we bring digital centre stage in those degrees. It's no longer, it doesn't matter what you're studying, we are working in a digital world, and all of our health professionals have to be trained in that area, our engineers, everything has to have digital right inside that. So they are absolutely critical areas. And then, of course, as universities, we need, and we are seeing this in this current economic stress which has been caused by this crisis, we also have to look increasingly at the kinds of ways that we can offer opportunities for our graduates to reskill, to upskill, to cross-skill, so that they remain competitive in their occupation of choice, or they are equipped to change jobs when we see the future impact of change on the workforce. So universities play a critical role in the future, but we need to change the way we do things, and we are certainly committed to doing that.
I'm taking lots of notes here, Debbie, and some of my key takeaways in terms of keywords, opportunities, potential, and our students need to be equipped as best they can. Thank you very much. And Andrew, I just want to come back to you now, if I may. In the current environment in Australia, there are real opportunities to improve collaboration between industry and academia. From your perspective, what are those opportunities, and by what means can we improve collaboration?
I think Dean and Debbie have done a great job of defining some pretty good things that have happened, in particular Dean's discussion around the vaccines and the vaccine development. When you look at academia as a label and industry as a label, we've got to start removing the labels and start looking at what we have to do as a collective collaboration across value chains to actually efficiently bring to market things that humanity needs. And if you think about the way we do manufacturing and the definition of manufacturing, we actually ignore the most important part, which is invention, research, design for capability to scale, scale as in produce as in supply chains as in go-to-markets. That ecosystem and that value chain means you've got to collaborate across the value chain. You can't do vertical activities. And the vertical activities in particular, if they're siloed, which is most of the 20th century, what we've done in the 20th century, university systems, high school systems, our entire industry systems have really been based on functionality, i.e. I'm a good researcher, I'm a good marketer, I'm a good manufacturer. But actually that's all gone. And in fact, China is our poster child for how that collaboration mechanism worked in a top-down economy. In 1990, China had 4 foreign-owned R&D labs. In 2010, they had 45,000. What did they do? Obviously, they had a big market, but they were clever. They actually, in their 5-year rolling plans, named their SEIs, their strategic emerging industries. They brought in foreign technology. The technology was, not the best technology, but it was technology, assembly line technology, basic manufacturing. But they had a plan to learn from the factory floor, to scale and invent, to prototype, and actually develop the next activity. And actually that ecosystem was put in place. Singapore did it. Germany still does it. What I did for the 2 US presidents that you've mentioned in the opening was I actually reintroduced that whole concept to the United States. We actually had neglected manufacturing and technology collaboration between research and academia and industry. So we put together in a manufacturing council, and both presidents adopted what we had to do, a collaborative approach that enabled public-private partnership models to actually be structured in a very top-down way. Government's spending money all the time in research. Most of that research doesn't find its way to the market. So the commercial side of that has to be bolted to the research side. So we created 11 institutes across the US. Those institutes were actually based on technology ecosystems, value chains, 3D printing, advanced sensors, lightweight materials, on and on and on. Located them across the parts of the country that were in trouble, actually, as old industries died, and began the collaborative process, public-private. So that handoff needs to be exquisite. It needs to be a partnership model. And the old saying, if you aren't at the table, you normally are on the menu. You will disappear. Okay, so you've got to find a way to keep cannibalizing yourself between industry and academia. That's all the technology capability lies there. It's just the stuff in the middle doesn't happen very well. Vertical teams becoming horizontal teams in a 20th century economy was fine, okay? But if you actually go up the quality ladder, bring in the internet, digitize everything as Debbie just went through, your speed of change has to be such that you can't run independent university systems. You can't run independent universities. You can't have the functional labs in the country. In the case of the United States, many, many national labs. In the case of Australia, a few national labs. You can't have them disconnected from the commercial and market reality. The problem with Australia and the US in 2005, when we did this work, and later adopted by President Obama in 2010, later by President Trump, later in the UK, later in Argentina, other countries. The problem is manufacturing was allowed to go subscale because the thought was that type of manufacturing doesn't employ enough people anymore. Of course, that's absolute rubbish. For every job in the factory floor, the multiplier around that ecosystem is 1 to 5 or 1 to 8. So in this country, we've done a very good job of not collaborating. We've got some incredibly smart people, all the people on this panel, most of the people listening into this, but we've allowed ourselves to generate a report, to actually form a committee and feel something will get done. To actually go ahead and do something means you've got to actually recraft your institutions. You've got to change yourself from actually studying something to measuring the outcome. You've got to actually get innovation and invention to be together. At Dow, when I had to retool Dow, that meant changing the culture of the company. In a private or public company, you could do that. 2,500 PhDs, 7,500 scientists during my watch were made to think like commercial animals. The same with the marketers. Understand the technology so you can actually sell it to customers. How to actually put that together is a cultural event. I would tell you that this is the biggest problem that we have in a short-term world. The biggest problem we have is if we let markets try to do it, it won't happen. You need national frameworks. You need a national technology strategy. You need a national industrial policy strategy for the 21st century. And frankly, this is where the world is going. Countries are competing against countries for jobs, high quality jobs. If you're a high quality nation like Australia, we've got to put meat on the bones of the term smart nation or smart state. We just can't talk about it. We actually have to attract industry from all over the world to come here to some of the best research that actually can exist in the world. I'm an optimist. I think Australia does have great research, does have great universities, like, of course, ours. but I do believe we've missed the plot in terms of thinking, you know what, they'll come to us anyway because we're a great place to live, and we can make enough money out of services and digging stuff out of the ground. This is the opportunity COVID's brought us.
Thank you, Andrew. I don't want you to relax just yet. There's a lot of food for thought there, and questions are coming in from around the globe as we speak. But I want to talk about Australia a little bit. Australia and the global manufacturing supply chain ecosystems have been hit the hardest by COVID-19, which has highlighted vulnerabilities in the sector. In addition, there's a perception amongst the younger generation that a career path in the manufacturing sector will be limited because of digitalisation and automation. In your opinion, what does the future manufacturing workforce look like in Australia?
Well, Debbie's quoted the stats before, and I mean, the one I'm very familiar with is the McKinsey study, which said that 473 million jobs will disappear by 2025 because of digitalization. The digitalization driver that I got very familiar with at Dow, and frankly, most of the United States companies are very advanced in this, as are many German companies, is what John Chambers talked about, which was the Internet of Things. Well, that was a concept back 10, 15 years ago. It's a reality today. If I look at the workforce at Dow and when we combine it with DuPont, we were operating with the same number of workers at 4 times our size over a 15-year period of time. So we quadrupled in size, but didn't change the number of workers. So what did that mean? That meant that the ecosystem around us mattered. Okay, what I talked about earlier about the job multiplier. So this change that's going on, and just using one of my board seats, IBM invented a new term. It's not blue collar worker anymore that you have to get ready for. It's not white collar worker. That's a 20th century paradigm. The term Ginny Rometty uses as part of the IBM strategy is new collar. A new collar worker understands the machine-human interface and works at that interface, understands AI, understands robotics, understands digital coding, understands all the things Deborah talked about. And actually what the new collar worker does, and actually they've gone further and invested, there's 150,000 students going through a school system. They rejigged the curricula and call it P-Tech high schools. This is Pathway to Technology Careers. IBM funded the retooling of public high school systems to cause graduates to come out of those high schools that they would then help get employment either at IBM or any of IBM's suppliers. And they're not alone. Microsoft, Google, all these companies are doing this. They are putting in place a supply chain of skills that those skills are new collar, interface with machines. Machines will replace the jobs that they need to replace. In fact, we should all aspire to be high wage countries. We don't want people living at minimum wage or below minimum wage. We would want a high quality of life for all of humanity. So as the machines do all the work that humans used to do, what do we replace those jobs with is how we actually take that incredible amount of insights that the machines can give us and interpret them. And the jobs that actually interface in an interpretation, whatever they may be, it may be into getting a new lightweight material. It may be in the health system, as was already mentioned by Debbie. I mean, for example, you get all the screening done, so you know what you're looking at as a doctor. You've got all the data in the world, and the AI has told you it's probably these 3 things. The doctor is actually a AI specialist, knows how to interpret that data, and then actually does something with it to create, the recommended therapy. So these interpreters, these high-tech interpreters, these new collar workers will create the new jobs. And I believe we've got to get ourselves ready for those jobs. But of course, that's supply side. Australia doesn't have much demand side. In fact, I hear from my tech friends that they have job openings and they can't get the supply side to match. The new jobs that are getting created in the space of digitalization, in the space of renewables, in the space of sustainability, we've got to get our kids to understand that that's modern manufacturing. The term advanced manufacturing has been used. It's a redesign of the entire concept of what 21st century manufacturing looks like. It's not smokestack, okay? It's high tech. It's not just quantity, it's quality. It's brains interpreting incredible insights as human insights. I think this ability to actually put this in place is a recrafting of our entire supply chain of education and, frankly, a reskilling of our workforce.
So much there, Andrew, and I can tell you I've got a question. I'm going to come back to you about robots taking over human jobs, but I just want to throw to Debbie and Dean right now. And I'd like to ask you both your thoughts on how our alumni community, as workers and as business leaders, can partner with the university to not just survive, but to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. We might start with you, Dean, if that's okay.
Sure. As Andrew's provided a really beautiful enunciation of the value in understanding global supply chains and value chains, when you work at a university, you understand the interface between the academic community and business as industry. And you've got to understand that university technologies are generally very, very early in their stage of development. So if we think of the NASA rating scale of a technology readiness level, we're very low in that scale. So what we have to move from is essentially the conventional approach of a technology push to more of a market pull phenomenon. And so that is, I believe, the ability for our alumni to get involved with essentially a top global university. We're a top 50. We're a powerhouse of research and innovation and teaching. But our alumni are embedded in industry and in government and in policy making, and they're looking for innovative solutions as technologies, products, services, our graduates, our talent. And I encourage our alumni to interface with our universities to essentially identify the needs of that early stage technology and product service. And that creates this market pull from that very dynamic and talented alumni base that we have. And the universities established really good and sophisticated processes for actually engaging with industry better. I believe that University of Queensland is one of the most industry engaged universities, certainly in Australia, but if not globally. We have that aspiration, we have that ability. Why? Because I say it's about processes and systems, and to Andrew's point, it's about building scale of that activity. So if I think across programs that we have like Industry Connect and our innovation brokers doing transdisciplinary problem solving from industry, we need that connectivity. You can help, you can bring your products and technology needs to the university, interface through these programs, touch on our entrepreneurship programs, touch on our graduate programs, our work integrated learning, interface through UniQuest, interface through our research partnership managers, and let's together bring about change at scale.
Well, there's a wealth of recommendations there. Thank you, Dean. Debbie, what are your thoughts here on how alumni can partner with the university in the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, I think to echo much of what Dean and Andrew has said, I mean, firstly, I would acknowledge and agree that I think UQ is very well positioned in this space. We've got many success stories, and Dean's talked through a number of ways in which alumni and business can engage with the university and do engage with UQ. We've got a great partnership with Boeing that has been in place since 2003. Many examples, and I think on the Australian landscape, UQ would certainly stand high among our universities that are engaged with industry. But I think Andrew's raised a broader point. It is an issue across our system. Australian universities and research that takes place in Australia, we punch well above our weight. You know, we have excellence across many fields in Australian research, and that's a good thing. You don't have impact if you're only mediocre. So you need excellence. But we know we need to be working more with industry. We know we need to be working more with business. And, you know, universities do need to do things differently. I released, but it's important, I released earlier this year for Universities Australia a study that had been undertaken by Ernst & Young, which found actually almost 17,000 companies in Australia had collaborated with the university last year. The direct benefit to those businesses was $12.8 billion. That's a return of almost $4.50 to business for each dollar they invested in. But we've got to do more. When we look at OECD data, Australian universities rank pretty low in terms of university industry engagement. That is something we have to address. Universities have to do things differently. We are often, people know we do great things, but we're kind of hard to find our way into. We're complex, large organisations. We've got to lean out to business more, invite business in, invite our alumni in. If you've got an issue that you're grappling with in your workplace, come and talk to us, because we have experts across many, many different areas. But also on the other side of it, business and industry needs to recognise in Australia what's down the road. All of, in each of our capital cities, there is a huge amount of expertise. And so, often what we find is industry broadly construed will look internationally for R&D. There is a huge amount of capacity here in Australia, and we must, universities can't solve the problem, industry and business by itself can't solve the problem. And as Ian Chubb, former chief scientist in Australia, used to say, it takes three to tango. Universities are part of it, industry's part of it, and government policies and the kind of work that Andrew's talking about absolutely has to facilitate that engagement. Now is the time, as we come out of this crisis, as we look at some, we've got to be able to drive the industries and the jobs of the future, not only because of the fourth industrial revolution, but because of the environment in which we find ourselves in. And as universities, we've got a key role to play, and I look forward to being part of that.
Well, I heard it here first tonight. It takes three to tango. Thank you, Debbie. I have a feeling that the Alumni Office will be flooded with communications in the days and weeks to come following all those suggestions. And what a perfect segue into taking some questions now that I can see from our viewers around the world. And the first question is for you, Debbie. Yes, Miss Shangyong Gore, International Liaison Officer at James Cook University in Townsville, has three questions in one for you. Debbie, what is your vision of the future of international education in Australia? What will be the biggest challenges, and how do we need to respond?
Well, thank you very much for that question. It's a very important question. I think the current pandemic has undoubtedly brought some immediate challenges to international education. That has been something that has occurred right across our universities. I have to say, though, UQ has responded well to this, and our international students have responded well as well. We currently have around 7,000 international students studying online from overseas. But of course, we'd much prefer that they were here with us. I think if we go to the broader question, my vision very much for international education comes back to the fact that leading universities must be global. We are training and educating our graduates to be part of a global workforce. We have to be global. We must educate them in a global environment, diverse student environments. We must provide them with opportunities for mobility outside of Australia, for international students to come and study with us. Research is fundamentally global. It is fundamentally global. The answers and the solutions to some of the huge challenges facing global society will not be solved by any one research team working by itself. It will be solved, as we've seen with a lot of the vaccine work. There's multiple teams working and in many cases working together. Research is absolutely global. So from my vision for the future of international education in Australia is that it will remain a very important part of what we do in Australia. Yes, it's changing in the context of this pandemic. Yes, it may look a bit different into the future because globalisation is in a sense being reshaped by this pandemic, but we cannot possibly take our eyes off the importance of being global, and we must deal with the challenges. We've got some immediate challenges in terms of when our borders will open and ensuring we are prepared for that. I think we will look to having sort of more hybrid models into the future where our international students may spend some of their time studying online and then have rich experiences here in Australia on our campuses. I think we will also look at partnerships, and some of those partnerships will be offshore. UQ, for instance, has a very important partnership with the Institute of Technology in Delhi. That's very important for us, and we will continue to have some of those offshore partnerships. But the important point is to be successful into the future, to be a top 50 university, as we are and will be into the future, we will need to be global.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Our next question is directed to you, Andrew, and it comes from Dr. Greg Blackburn, Senior Business Development Manager at IMC in Germany. He asks, how can I stop a robot taking over my job? I can't hear Andrew.
I was muted, sorry. I laid out a menu about the human-machine interface. And what I suggested there was that as humans move up the scale from data to information to knowledge to wisdom, that this thing called wisdom that was in the domain, of mythology and gurus now becomes the domain of everybody. All of us, we will migrate in the next decade through digitalization and AI to a notion that instead of, things like Google being a dumb search, it'll be a smart search. Machines will be able to extract insights that we will have to interpret. So I'm not afraid of the robots, or at least worried about them. I think if they do take your job, they're taking the part of your job that frankly can be easily replaced anyway by, if you like, other humans. Humans all need to move up the scale called insights and use this incredible intelligence that we're going to be able to mine to actually solve the challenges Debbie talked about. We have 9 billion people by 2050 on a planet that's straining at the seams under 7 billion people. If we don't put our technology to work to solve the provision of clean, affordable, safe water supplies, clean, affordable, nutritious, healthy food, bringing down the temperature so we get net zero or less in terms of our carbon emissions, replacing carbon. All these are technological challenges that only the machines working with us can we solve. We've got to build up this hierarchy of knowledge and capability. We've got to do it through our school system, as already discussed, but we also have got to do it in terms of the jobs that you will eventually have. So it's not the robot replacing what you're doing now that you should be looking at. It's what can you be doing to actually harness and harvest this incredible new way of looking at things. And then what we've got to do as humanity, geopolitical leaders, business leaders, academic leaders, we're going to create the institutions of the 21st century where we can actually work together to do this. Now, as you may know, we're starting to splinter apart like no tomorrow. The anarchy that's in place in the world by us actually being divided is accelerating. So we've actually got to bridge back by saying, how do we manage ourselves together to solve global problems? I believe all of that starts in nations actually working together. And this nation needs to start scaling as a nation, not scaling as a lot of different institutions. So look, it's a long answer to the question, but I'm not worried about your job being replaced. I would like people like you to upgrade your skills so you can manage what's in front of us.
Thank you very much. We have another question that's come in and it's directed to Dean. It's from Dr. Jasmine Muir, Innovation Lead, Digital Agriculture Services Australia, and she asks, Dean, technology within industry is moving rapidly. How do universities ensure course content keeps up to industry when the teaching academics have rarely worked within industry recently to acquire these skills themselves?
Thanks, Jasmine. That's a great question. I think you'll find at UQ that by design, our teaching staff and our research staff are populated with a large cohort who have spent extensive time in industry, either directly themselves or through their students or postdocs. We have quite a shuttle between our students and postdocs working within industry, embedded in SMEs and larger companies, and then coming back into the academic environment. our work integrated learning programs and our internship programs across the university ensure that we are very well connected to industry. I'll give you an example. You're in an ag digital company, and it's based on using data to ensure that our agricultural productivity is enhanced. So Professor Michael Brunig was recruited out of industry after a 20-year career in the sensor technology space to be the head of, quite traditionally, our information technology and electrical engineering school. Last year, he moved to be head of the business school. So why would you put somebody in the business school to run it across business, economics and law that has actually got a data science background? Why? Because that's the space that we actually need our students to understand the impact of big data, all the things that Andrew and Debbie have been talking about here, of really equipping our graduates for the challenges and the opportunities that the world now presents to them. So I think you'll find that UQ is very adept at having these people with deep industry knowledge, tailoring and tapering our course offerings to what industry needs.
Thank you. We have another question. It is for Andrew, and it's from Mr. John Flint, former economist, accountant and auditor at Smart Audit Australia. And he asks, politics frequently disrupts and disbelieves scientific knowledge and progress to a better world. How can academics and institutions better promote scientific knowledge with confidence?
It's a great question, and one of my favourites in the sense of one of my, life's purpose and missions. Chemical engineer, proud graduate of the university, had this fabulous career at Dow Chemical, and all the way along I noticed that what I was doing was not well understood, and certainly the role of our company and even myself in progressing solutions for humanity was badly understood and misunderstood and misrepresented. That responsibility is ours, and ours means we've got to get our narrative, and Anita has the skills that we all need to gain as somebody who understands the power of a story and the power of representing that story in the context of the people who really, especially in today's world of ADD, breaking news, everything, attention spans disappearing, social media, we have to kill all the noise, get through all the noise, and speak to what is the power of science in providing answers for the purpose of people on this planet. I think that narrative, and we all have our role in that narrative, but science has the enabling role. If you play a dinner party conversation, go around the table and ask people to name 3 people they'd like to have dinner with in all of history, including people who are currently alive, and try it out at your next dinner party. Just in the moment they have to answer, go around. You'll rarely find, and I'm including people of scientific background, people actually naming scientists. In fact, many people don't even know many scientists. So that's on us. And then, maybe I can conclude the answer to this question by a little plug for the academy we're building at UQ that I'm very proud bears my name, but it's one of the things I felt so strongly about. We've got to get that next generation of leaders, our scientists, to have the communication skills, the articulation skills, the contextual knowledge, the curious learning to actually be difference makers using their technology backgrounds. And I would encourage many young people, if not, people, approaching middle age and beyond, run for office. If you have a technology background, it's on you to explain to the world why technology is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Andrew, I think you're going to have to tell the UQ alumni community now who your 3 guests would be at a dinner party.
Oh, I'm unabashed. I don't know how many people are listening to this webcast, but I assume I'm going to have dinner with some of you sometime. I'll save it for that dinner.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. By the way,
it's not 3 at the same time. It's not 3 at the same time, individually, one-on-one.
Oh,
who would you pick?
Okay. We'll all be thinking about that tonight, late at night. Our next question is for Debbie, and it is from Dr. John Pickering, CEO of Everton Brisbane. And he asks, how important will innovation in the social and behavioural sciences be in the new global economy?
Well, thank you very much, John, for that question. Let me answer it in 2 ways. firstly say social and behavioural sciences will be absolutely critical in the new global economy. Behavioural skills, understanding human behaviour, providing a greater understanding of how we change and predict behaviour is absolutely critical, but the social sciences, how we build social cohesion, ensure that we have strong social fabric in all of our communities is absolutely without question important. But innovation, and I think it's a nice way of putting the question, I have to say, because I think our humanities experts and professionals and our scholars in humanities and the social and behavioural sciences need to be part of the big teams that are dealing with the challenges facing us. If we look at dealing with climate change, yes, there's a huge technological impact in that area, and Andrew's talked a bit about this. There's technology that will help us deal with climate change. There's political issues, but fundamentally it's about human behaviour and it's about human change and encouraging each other to understand how we need to change our behaviours. So that's one example. We've talked a lot about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and I talked a bit about ethics at the beginning. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. That is fundamentally important, and our social and behavioural scientists and our graduates trained in those areas have to be part of the conversation right from the beginning, not at the end. Right from the beginning, they have to be able to work in the teams that Andrew's talked about, the multidisciplinary teams that come together and help all of us our communities deal with the complexities facing us all. And so that's where the innovation's required. It's not sitting in our own silos, doing work in our area. We have to be in there with our sleeves rolled up, working with scientists, working with engineers, and, as I say, addressing those issues, bringing into the conversation. How do we explain this to each other? How do we ensure that we can bring our communities with us as we do make change to deal with climate change, for instance? How do we raise those ethical issues? How do we debate them? How do we have those conversations at the beginning, not at the end when we find we've got a problem? So it's a great question, and obviously from my background I would of course be saying that social and behavioural sciences are absolutely critical to our future.
Thank you, Debbie. We've got a final question this evening. It's from Mr. Sean Cole. It's for you, Dean. Mr. Sean Cole Hunter, I should say, is a process engineer at Dowdens, Australia, and he asks, in which emerging industries can you see Australia developing a competitive advantage, and what framework is required to get there?
Well, thanks for your question, Sean. So I think in simple terms about the need to feed the world, fuel the world, heal the world and educate the world. So if I think of the emerging industries against that framework, I think in biotech, I think of the emerging need in this pandemic as an example of addressing unmet clinical need. So I think, the university is wonderfully equipped to do that. And you can look at the pandemic opportunity as we need greater surveillance, diagnostics, therapies, but we need all of the social and essentially human elements to understand the profound effect this pandemic has on our mental health, on the way that we're going to live as a society through this. So, that touches on the humanities as absolutely needed in terms of, as Debbie's very well articulated here, of the emerging needs will be in the service industries to service our community that needs to respond to the challenges of this. I think to then feeding the world, and we have an absolute strength in the University of Queensland in ag and food science. And I think there that we're looking at new innovations to scale to make our plants and our animal livestock more disease resistant. And I think that, the use of data again in that space will be profound at bringing scale to our food production. I just remarked that the National Institutes of Health achieved a doubling of its science budget, its research funding budget from US Congress in the 70s through the advent of molecular biology. And they went to Congress on the basis of, yes, they're a health institute. But what they said was that if we adopt molecular biology, it'll equip America with the ability to use genetic manipulation to produce more food and feed the world. And I think we have those opportunities in ag science to use these new technologies in emerging industries. Everybody is interested in their gut health now. And I think that, you know, functional foods and sustainable practices of intense cropping, protected cropping will be absolutely new areas. If I think to actually the whole basis of sustainability, which is a very strong discipline area for the University of Queensland. Your own business, I think, 40 years ago, you were fixing water pumps in Canefields and Mackay. But now it's about process engineering. We look at water runoff and eutrophication of the Great Barrier Reef. We look at that and having to control that through a process. So I look at a technology that we've just licensed out of the University of Queensland from the Australian Wastewater Management Centre. So we've got, deep research. And what does it do? It's about odour and corrosion control in water utilities worldwide, because that's a tremendous cost. So I see that these service industries across those paradigms are where they're going to be emerging industries and where there's going to be emerging jobs, and they'll be high-tech jobs, to Andrew's point.
Thank you so much, Dean, for that. And unfortunately, that was our final question for the evening. We have to draw this conversation to a close. I'd like to thank Andrew, Dean and Debbie for their time, as well as thank all of our alumni from around the world who tuned in to listen to this very robust discussion tonight. I hope you've taken as much from this evening as I have. If you check your inboxes next week, you will find a deep dive interview with our speakers to follow on from our discussion tonight, as well as some links and opportunities to be part of the wider Changemaker network. Thank you again, everyone, for your time tonight, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, or perhaps it's morning, wherever you are in the world. Good night.